Some disappointment in the June jobs report. Joining me now from Washington is U.S. Labor Secretary Thomas Perez. Mr. Secretary, thank you for your time.
Always a pleasure, Rhonda.
We still had job growth over 200,000, which is a positive, but some revisions in prior months and the current month's growth not as strong as what had been expected. Is this a setback, or is there seasonal factors to blame here?
Oh, this is a solid report. It's very consistent with what expectations were. We've now had 2 years. This is the best 2-year stretch that we've seen of job growth since the end of the Clinton administration. You look at not only the quantity of jobs that are being created, but also the quality of jobs are going up over the last couple of years. Business and professional services led the charge last month. They've led the charge in the past year. Those are good middle-class jobs. The health sector continues to be a recession-proof sector, actually, and again, creating good middle-class jobs. We have undeniable room for improvement, and there's still work to do. We need to lift wages. That's why the president is talking about an overtime rule this week, because when managers were managing when I was a kid, they were middle-class jobs, and as a result of Bush-era regulation, that gave leverage to employers and took leverage from workers, those jobs are no longer middle-class jobs. So the president's talking about wage growth. We're talking about investing in skills and all those things to grow the middle class.
Let me just jump in for a moment, because
Sure.
Before we talk about the overtime, I want to ask you about another aspect of the report, and that was the participation rate, because that is still low. And as you know, even the chairman of the Federal Reserve, Janet Yellen, is not entirely satisfied with what we're seeing on the labor front. So what do we do with that participation rate in particular to see some improvement there?
Well, the participation rate has been within a very narrow band for the last 14 months or so, between 62.7% and 62.9%. And this past month, I think it was 62.6%. One thing that's important to know about this past month, aside from the fact that 1 month doesn't make a trend, is that in this past month, the participation rate did not go down because people got discouraged and left the workforce. If that had happened, I'd be much more concerned. June is the month of the year where you see the biggest amount of people entering the workforce. And that's because we have seasonal workers like my teenage daughter coming home from college. And what happened in June was that the pace of people entering the workforce, in particular young people, was not what it was in past Junes. And that's what accounts for the dip in the labor force participation. And I think there are two potential explanations. One is that a lot of schools ended later because of the winter weather forced them to stay open another week. So kids weren't getting out looking for work until later. We also collected the data a little bit earlier in June than we normally do because we wanted to get it out before the 4th of July. So we'll continue to monitor that labor force participation. But at the same time, I'm heartened by the fact that this is not about discouraged workers leaving the workforce.
Now, Mr. Secretary, on to the overtime extension proposal by the Obama administration.
Sure.
As you know, some business groups have come out and raised concerns, and there will likely be more concerns going forward. How do you win over those groups, and how do you prevent any sort of opposition from Republicans that might try some sort of legislative end around, if you will, to the proposal?
Well, this president wakes up every day figuring out what we can do to lift wages and help the plight of people who want to stay in the middle class or climb into the middle class. And the overtime rule is a quintessential example of that. Overtime stands for the proposition that if you work extra, you should be paid extra. And the National Retail Federation's own study showed that this would actually create jobs. And how does that happen, you might ask? Well, it happens because right now you got people who are managers, really responsible jobs. They're opening the place, they're closing the place, and they're working 60 hours a week, and they're making as little as $25,000. They're working that 20 hours and basically doing that for free. That's not right, and that's not fair. And they're able to do that, employers, because in 2004, the Bush administration changed the rules to calculate when a person is exempt from having to receive overtime. They changed the rules to help employers and hurt workers. That's not right. And so when you have to pay that worker for the extra 20 hours, what's going to happen to workers is one of a few things, all of which are good. They're either going to get more pay, or they're not going to get a pay hike, and they'll get more time. The gift of time is priceless when you have kids like I do. And in order to do that, employers are going to have to add more workers, because now they have to actually pay for that extra 20 hours. So this is helpful. This is about what it means to be middle class, this overtime rule. And that's why we're putting it out, because this is about fairness, and this is about being consistent with the promise of the Fair Labor Standards Act, which says that we reward work with a fair wage, and when you work extra, you get paid extra.
Secretary Perez, we'll end it there. I thank you for your time.
Always a pleasure.
I'm Rhonda Schaffler for TheStreet.